Great. Wonderful. Julia, thank you so much for today's session about the art and joy of stuckness, which is also about your book that is almost being launched, which is so exciting. And I think everybody here today is looking forward to your session. So with that, I'll hand over to you.
Great. Thank you, Charisse. It's always so incredibly exciting to see your faces pop up. I will never, ever get used to this popping up of faces of people who are interested and here. It's so lovely to see you. And so many of you whom I dearly love. It's wonderful to have you here today. So thank you. So, anybody know the name of the song that we played? So some of you missed it. So that was a Bob Marley song from the, what was it? Would it have been the 70s? So let's have a look here. So I'm going to use this song to frame some of the discussion that we have today. So I'm going to be talking about stuckness, and here's a picture done by Peter van Straten, which has a boat trying to sail in a swimming pool in circles. The boat is stuck. So there'll be Peter's pictures for every slide. They're incredibly engaging. And if you ever would like to buy any, please feel free to contact me and I'll send you his number. So that song you heard was a song sung by Bob Marley. And 40 years ago, possibly aided by an international herb, I became interested in this idea of inner freedom. What is inner freedom? How do you get it? Does it exist? What do we do with it? And so a study of stuckness is always a study of freedom. And in this case, it's inner freedom that we're going to look at today. So I thought we could start off by just going off into pairs and answering this question. What is inner freedom? And what are some of the things that limit our inner freedom? So we're going to come at stuckness from the back end. What is inner freedom? So Charisse, you're going to send everyone off.
Right. Just bear
And
with
we
me.
want, let's say we'll give 10 minutes. Quick sticks.
See, there are some otter note takers in the room, so they're just messing with my creating breakout rooms.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I'm just checking that people are in rooms with other people. Okay. Right. Okay. We're going to send you off for 10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes. What is inner freedom? And what are some of the things that limit your inner freedom?
Thank you.
Cool, you're all back. So, anybody want to talk about their experience? What is inner freedom and what's blocking your inner freedom? We're just going to take a few comments, but if you want to put something in the chat box, please feel free. Anyone want to talk? What's in a, oh, was that you? Yes,
Miriam.
hi, Miriam. Hello,
Yeah.
welcome.
Hi.
Up early in the
Hi.
morning.
9 o'clock. I'm not Montana yet.
Oh.
What's blocking inner freedom is anger, at least on my end, because what I've noticed is my anger that I can't move forward.
Mhm.
My anger at human beings in the United States, my anger at everything that's going on. And usually I can move forward, and there is a tremendous amount of stuckness. It's like I feel like I haven't said what there is to say for me to really move forward to the people I need to say it. So stuckness is for me about remaining angry. I would say fall back as well.
Miriam, I feel you. Thank you.
Yeah.
The world at the moment. Thank you. Verna, hi. What would you like to add? Out there free. Yeah.
Yes, for me, stuckness is trying to intellectually block anything in the moment. Simon and I spoke, this sort of when my brain generates past shapes and future shapes and possibly even distorting the now, is to saying no to any of that. And then that's my stuckness. But when I accept that, okay, all of that is happening from me at the moment and through me, then it goes away. Then the equanimity arises again.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's lovely. That's a lovely way to articulate it. All these preconceived ideas and information and shapes that come in that block our easy engagement with the world. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes. Hi.
Hello.
Zelda. Welcome.
Hi. Thank
Our
you.
publisher. Yay. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much. So I think for me, when we were chatting about what are some of the things that limit my inner freedom at all, the word that kept popping up was the fear of this, the fear of that. So it's almost like the fear of the responsibility of being free, the fear of letting that freedom come out, the fear of the untetheredness, the fear of potentially, if you do have that freedom and you act on it, what are the implications? So very interesting that actually the concept of fear just kept popping up for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful, because fear is one of the things that keeps us stuck. It's one of the ways in which we get stuck, and it's great to have like anger, fear, and then there's another one, grief. Those are the three big emotions that keep us stuck. Thank you so much for that. Fear's a big one for everyone. Thanks, Zelda.
Great.
Any other comments? Jane, is that you there?
There, I must unmute myself. There's something about having choice in the moment. So feeling, so for me, inner freedom is feeling like I have a choice. So even if I'm feeling angry or fearful, I can still choose how I respond. And so it's like the intensity of emotional contractedness in my body that would limit my choice in the moment.
Beautiful, and such an existential idea. You know, Sartre would say, we always have choice because no choice is choice. He's a bit of a bugger the way he catches us at things like this. Beautiful, thank you. The ability to have choice. Any last comments before we look at the slides? No? Cool. Alrighty, so as you know, I will be publishing a book on this, and I had a choice about what to include in this session. And I've been doing this stuckness research for 10 years. Can you believe it? I've been really stuck on it, and I don't think I'm finished yet. And I'm passionate about a lot of the different elements of stuckness. So I've taken the rather dodgy step of deciding to give you a sort of an overview and see if you want to go deeper into whatever. So let's have a look. I'm going to talk quite a lot at you. If you would like to ask questions, please let me know. Let me get us on to share, and here we are. So, of course, I've got every last, okay. So, stuckness is kind of like the opposite of inner freedom, and it's the focus for work today. So, it can be very, very simple or very, very complicated. Not everyone here today are coaches, so I'm going to try and keep it kind of clean language, but occasionally I'm going to get technical, and I've got 1 or 2 case studies to help kind of ground the theory. Yeah, so the key authors influencing this work: Steve Biko, of course, the real big thinker around inner freedom. And the rest of them, you know, Jennifer, who's been very supportive as well. And key brilliant friends who have helped me get through this and clarified ideas for me: Simon, Lucille, Helena, and Chantal, and many, many more of you. So thank you very much for that. So that's just a bit of the background. I'm going to be talking a kind of a meta-narrative, but know that meta-narrative is backed up through rigorous research. And so if you open a vein, authors and data will come pouring out, just as a warning. So let's start getting into the field of stuckness. Everyone gets stuck multiple times over the course of their life. It tends to be unpleasant. It can be very painful, and it can even kind of deaden you. It can numb you out. It is, however, a generally normal process of healing and growth. So it's generally a good thing, can last for years. Some of the people I interviewed were stuck for 10 years. That is a long time to tread water. So individuals get stuck, pairs get stuck, organizations get stuck, communities and countries get stuck. So it can happen right across the continuum. What is the problem with stuckness? What is the problem? Oops, that's me moving objects around. So the problems really are short-term generally. They're around damaging a person's self-esteem, around the experiences of pain, isolation, lostness, the impact of that on work. And then one of the more interesting ones is if you get stuck for a number of years, how do you tread water for so long? Well, for many people, we narcotize. So we narcotize to stay stuck. We drink, take drugs, work too hard, and get involved in other addictions. Those are ways in which we keep ourselves stuck and weather the burdens of staying stuck. The benefits, rather the opportunities. So the biggest opportunity stuckness offers us is a kind of redemption. And I'm using this term very much in the way that Bob Marley does it. It's a chance to process our pasts, figure out what was happening in the past, and incubate a new version of ourselves. So it's an incubation chamber. And it's for this reason that we get a developmental impasse. We stop developing when we're stuck, is because our energy is focused inwards, processing our pasts and creating a new self. Hopefully, this is going to help you be more yourself. Hopefully, it's going to help people create a more satisfying life. For those interested in maturity, stuckness is also a kind of fall back and fall forward type of process. So it can actually also enable maturational shifts. So it can be all these different things. The caveat is we have to learn how to get stuck well and easily and relatively fast. We can't avoid getting stuck, but we can learn how to do it well and quickly and less painfully. So I'm going to move you all there. The dance partner for the stuck person is the context. And this is very important in the map of stuckness. When we are stuck, we have a dislocated relationship to our context. We don't connect to it because we are behaving like we're in another time. I'm going to come back to this. Don't be too disturbed by this at the moment. When we are fluid or when we have inner freedom, we have a more connected relationship to our context. We can dance with it. We can flow with it. We can take up opportunities. There are, however, quite a few factors in our context at the moment that really are enhancing our chances of getting stuck. I call them the 5 horsemen of the stuckness apocalypse. I don't have time to go into them at the moment, but I think you can start guessing around my thinking. So it's, neoliberalism, capitalism, materialism, I'm all for living well, but I'm talking about a very specific shift in values as a result of neoliberalism. I'm going to talk to that a little bit later. Loss of humanity, trauma, inequality, and of course, climate change. All of these factors play a role in creating an environment that is more conducive to us getting stuck. And you will see how later on. Any questions? Any thoughts? Are you cool? You happy to flow? Great. So we can deal with stuckness on a simple way or in a very complex way. So I'm going to give you a very simple model to start with, and then we're going to build it up so that it includes the psychological dynamics of stuckness. So there's lots of healing and learning cycles. We all know Freudian repetition compulsion. We know about Lewin. We know about Jung and the transcendent function, and there are many, many, many more. This is just another one. It is a cycle because cycles are how humans heal and grow. So we kind of start the cycle here. We're fluid, we're dancing with the context. We learn a lovely dance and we learn how to do it really well. The context changes, but by this time, we sedimented, we concretize into that one dance. And that's the only dance we know. So we're dancing an old dance in a new context. And we think that it's the only dance we know. And so we don't know what to do when the context changes. We just keep dancing faster and faster and faster. But the context has changed. So our actions have no tractions and we become frustrated. We are now stuck. So the next stage of the cycle is to go inwards and to renew. We have to go into our inner worlds. We got to renew our inner worlds so that we can learn how to learn to dance a new dance. That's the basic structure of the cycle of stuckness. Now I'm going to get into it a little bit deeper and give you a little bit more detail on how this works. Right. So at the next level, a way to look at the cycle of stuckness is 3 losses and 3 gains. So we are going to lose 3 things in order to get stuck, and they are ourselves, others, and meaning. And then we get stuck, and then in order to become fluid again, we're going to have to regain ourselves, regain others, and regain meaning. So now that's the second level. Now I'm going to take you to the third level, and hopefully it's going to make sense for you. Here we go. So now we're looking at the stages of the cycle of stuckness. Part 1, we have, and I'm going to give you details on each of these stages, so hang in with your questions. Part 1 is an incomplete wounding, finds a salient context to heal and grow. Part 1. Part 2, we disengage from the world. We have 3 losses, and we do defensive behavior. Part 3, we experience a developmental impasse. We stop growing and learning. We experience pain and frustration and lostness. Part 4, we get out of stuckness by reconnecting to ourselves, others, and meaning, and working through the feelings. Then we come into peaking and plateauing, and we start the whole thing all over again. So are you ready to look at a case study and some more detail about how this happens? Are you with me? Am I making sense, or have I gone off my rockers, which is highly likely? Okie dokie, part 1. So, an incomplete wound finds a salient context to learn and grow. So I'm using that term incomplete wound in a very broad way. I know lots of people in coaching prefer things to be positively framed. I haven't found the right word yet. So I'm sitting with the term wound. So everyone has incomplete woundings. They're left over from our childhood, from the times we lived in, and basically in that Freudian sense of repetition compulsion, we seek situations that will allow us to heal. And then I've given you a whole list of types of incomplete wounding. So intergenerational wounding, racial wounding, issues or wounding from too much, too little control, safety, love, all those sort of childhood experiences. Wounding at being irrelevant, isolated, scapegoated, and unresolved grief, because often people get stuck in grieving. It's a very interesting phenomenon. We can talk a little bit about that later, but it's when, for example, your partner dies and you can't move on from that grief. So many types of wounding. So what happens is, so I'm going to give you the case study that helps you make sense of it. But basically, we get into a context. Our wounding is activated unconsciously. It goes, yay, I'm in the same logic as my earlier wounding. I'm in the same kind of context. Maybe this is a chance for me to do something different this time so I can heal. So the focus moves from outside in the world to the inner world of the person, to this possibility of healing. So now we go to Adelia. So Adelia grew up in a family that required children to be very compliant, not express their emotions or be childlike. Adelia did very well. Adelia did well in banking because she knew how to be compliant and do things perfectly. So Adelia is now back in the family of origin. She's back in a highly compliant environment that is very similar to that of her family of origin. And it's an opportunity for her to respond differently this time. Are you okay out there? All right, good. I'll keep rolling. So I can't see you all at once. Okie dokie. So now Adelia is in the wound. So this is the next stage where we disengage from the world. We have those 3 losses happening and we get involved in defensive behaviors. So I've already said that the wound invites us to disengage from the environment. But not only that, it invites us to disengage from our full self. We need a very broad self so that we can adapt and direct our life. This is not possible when we have a very narrow 2-dimensional self. There are many reasons why, and I'm happy to elaborate on that. But just for this slide, what happens is that when we live life, we get invited into these opportunities to become bewitched, amputated, or dead. So when we are bewitched, we become controlled by something outside ourselves. And I think you as coaches will remember clients who said, if you say to them, what do you want to do? And they said, no, I just want to be successful. So that's an example of maybe being bewitched by success. What kind of success? Maybe conventional versions of success. So we lose our control of our life in an outside idea or expression takes control. When we're amputated, we lose aspects of ourselves. For example, we go to school and they say, your jokes are not welcome here. And so we amputate our joke-making capacity. And dead really refers to when our whole inner world goes to sleep or never becomes activated because of trauma, because of objectification, and because of a number of other processes. There's some beautiful case studies, even if I say so myself, of people that are bewitched, amputated, or dead in the book. And they speak to how this happens and even how intergenerational forces kind of add into this process, and how you might work with clients to try and reinvigorate people's inner world so they're not bewitched, amputated, or dead. When they are bewitched, amputated, or dead, and they're living in the wound, our self narrows and sediments. So a self that sediments is an existential term that says that we get a narrow version of ourselves, and then that becomes solid, and it's all we know ourselves to be. So, for example, a guy who's a painter and a maths guy and a this and a that, he goes and he becomes an asset manager, and then all of his other identities fall away. So he's only an asset manager. And he has a very narrow identity. So when we have narrow identities, we reduce our capacity for adaptation. So this is one of the trigger places for coaches to work, is to broaden a sense of self. The second area is in our relationship to others. So when we have engaged relationships, they humanize us and enable us to grow. We also build our identity based on our experience other people have of us. So other people are really critical to help us grow. There are a number of factors in the world that lead us to have limited or very poor relationships with other people. And there's a list of them: objectification, attachment styles, trauma, addiction, and grief, all of which isolate us. And this is on top of structural factors. As we know, isolation is an epidemic in modern day life. Just for those, so objectification is when we treat people as objects for our use. So instead of seeing them as fully human, they're just our servant or slave or, yeah. I'm not going to go into too much detail. So when we have diminished relationships with others, we lose our capacity to adapt. So now we've lost two things that would help us adapt. We're actually getting into trouble. We're out of the context and we're losing our capacity to adapt. No wonder we're going forward to stuckness. So the last loss is around meaning. So we need meaning to have direction in life and courage. Meaning allows us to plan for longer projects and to to survive incredibly difficult periods. But meaning can be lost in many ways. There is a list of some of them. Capitalized life syndrome, which is when we put things that are not meaningful in the place of meaning. For example, substitute designer handbags for good relationships. We can also have poor distributions of meaning. So, for example, if all your meaning is at work and there's no meaning at home, then you have what is called a donut life, which is empty in the middle. Or you can have all your meaning at home and no meaning at work. Then you have a problem either way. We all have to make individual decisions about where we place meaning in our life, and what the distribution of that should be. But it's something people don't think about. So trauma shatters meaning. And then another thing is changes in life stage. So meaning has to change as we grow old. So if I'm stuck with the meaning of my life when I'm 20 and now I'm going to be 60, it's not appropriate anymore. So people lose meaning in this way. When we don't have meaning, we can't direct our life and we lose the courage to act. So all of these things add up to stuckness. Now we're stuck. We've lost self, others, and meaning. And we are living in the behaviors of the wound. So we reenacting those old behaviors, and they've got no traction because they belong to the time of the wound, not to the current context. Right, so let's see Adelia. So Adelia continued with her compliant and perfectionistic approach to work. She was very transactional and found it hard to build relationships. Her whole identity was consumed by the earlier way of being. She lost connection to her full self, others, and work became less meaningful to Adelia. She received feedback that she would never advance to higher levels because she was experienced by other people as pedantic and robotic. She lacked leadership and relational skills. So there she is doing behaviors that fit the time of the wound and not the context that she's in, because she's in a bank and they did want her compliant, but now they want her to have interpersonal skills and she doesn't have the capacity to adapt. Anybody has a client like this? It's a common one. Cool. Right, part 3. We're now in the stuck zone, developmental impasse, and the pain starts to come. So now we're stuck. we don't know why we're stuck. We were just doing the same thing we've always done, but we don't know why it's not working now. We're not sure of who we are. People have looked at us and we've become isolated. In corporates, typically when people get stuck, everyone pulls away because no one wants to stand next to the person who's not doing well. So yeah, become isolated and struggle to find meaning. So let's look at how this works with Adelia. She couldn't see what she was doing wrong. She felt picked on and conspired against. So she became more pedantic and robotic as a way to control her life. But Adelia failed to deliver on her projects because she was demoralized and she didn't have relationships within the organization. She stole stationery and time to punish the organization. Leadership said she was destructive to the culture and sidelined her, marking her as the first to go in the next retrenchment cycle. Poor old Adelia. What was interesting in the research was it's at this point that people are feeling so angry that they want to take it out against the organization. And so some of the ways that they do that are fraud, nepotism, stealing time, stealing paper, and you can see this. And you can see this also in large organizations when there's been a lot of retrenchment and people kind of haven't caught up with the next flow. So it's a way of punishing the organization for the pain. Whew. Right. Part 4. Release from shame and pain. Grief initiates change, rebuilding ourselves, and we start pulling out of the stuckness side. So we know by now that if we don't have a broad self, we can't adapt and direct our life. When we have a narrow self, we become like a one-trick pony that is good for a coal mine or a circus, but not for both. So what we have to do at this point is to think about creating a container for a full self. So it's better not to have like a goal, like I will create a full self. The best is to create a container for a full self. And all of you coaches know how to do this intuitively. So you want to connect to feelings as signposts and directions. You want to reintegrate bits of yourself that have been discarded or amputated. You want to experiment with identics. You want to do somatic work to connect with self, mindfulness work, whatever approach you take. This kind of piece of work is actually very intuitive for coaches in general. But the idea is to expand the number of identities within. Experiment, bring back, play with, yeah. Then in terms of relationship to others, we know why people have to have them. And so once again, it's about creating a container for engaged relationships. Some of the things that I speak about in the book are, how do you be for yourself and be for others? How do you balance that? What's the ratio? Is the ratio working for you? Do you need to change it? All of these are kind of internal decisions that can be made in coaching. A very, very important point here is taking oneself less seriously. There's quite a lot in the book. It's quite an area where I love to get on my my box and shout. So taking oneself less seriously includes a lot of different ideas. The one is the idea of entitlement. And what are we really entitled to? And I'm with the Stoics who kind of really say we're not entitled to much. We're certainly not entitled to have a brilliant relationship to have our feelings and thoughts be heard by other people at all points in our life when we feel like it, to always be out of comfort. I mean, to always be in a comfortable position. So our life has created a whole bag of new versions of entitlements, like pain is wrong and I should never have to endure it. So part of this is also exploring those entitlements with coaches, you know, and maybe reframing pain a little bit, because our tendency as coaches is to kind of help people narcotize or reframe pain, instead of building stamina for pain. So, you know, pain is useful. It gets us moving. When we don't have stamina for pain, what can happen is that we can't look at other people's pain. So we want to build our stamina to be able to think while in pain. I'm giving you a very simple overview of that idea. Letting others in and getting into others were two other areas that can support people to build a container where you can have engaged relationships with others. The last one is the meaning bit. So meaning is very important for humans. It's the why of living. And if you're deeply existential, then maybe you also have some sort of mad understanding of the work of Albert Camus, which he says, well, actually, there's no meaning. It's all absurd anyway. But for us mere mortals, we are meaning-making machines, and we need to make meaning. So how do we make meaning? We have to understand ourselves and connect with others. The most meaningful type of meaning tends to be transpersonal. It involves other people, helping them, serving them, growing them. So we have to look in that space for meaning. We got to think about what's meaningful at this life stage, avoid meaning that's actually not meaningful, and work on distributing meaning across a life. All conversations that you can have with yourself or in coaching. So in order to unlock the stuckness, we have to work with very specific emotions. Most of them are very, very useful. Anger and pain are brilliant. What was interesting in the cycle of stuckness is that people only start feeling the pain when they lose others. People are happy to amputate parts of themselves and not feel the pain of that amputation. But it really only becomes apparent to people in that second stage. It takes us a while to feel the pain. We need pain because humans are very bad with change. And if we didn't have pain, we probably wouldn't adapt and grow. Shame is a very important emotion to work with in the cycle of stuckness. It's not always useful, but everyone has a version of it. So what shame does is it locks us into our pasts. It locks us into our past wound and our past behaviors. So we actually have to work quite carefully as a coach around shame. So either help people work around it or to maybe try and release it. I'm not sure what's going to work. I think it's a very tricky area and people really struggle with it. But we have to try and work around or release it, because otherwise we're never going to go forward. It will keep us stuck in the past. So then the next one is grief. Grief is fantastic in the cycle of stuckness. So we've got to do a lot of grieving. We've got to grieve unlived lives, unlived relationships, what's happened to us when we're stuck, things from our childhood. All of these things need grieving. And the role of grieving is to soften us. And when we soften, we can learn to grow around our stuckness and not experience it as a dead end. So grieving is brilliant. And when your client or when you start grieving around getting stuck, that is the time to shout hallelujah. Somatic and mindfulness work. So now we're back on Adelia. So Adelia gets a sideways, slightly downwards promotion. She becomes enraged at this, and a coach is hired to help her be less aggressive. The coach enables her to express her anger and grieve her situation. She grieves unlived lives and unlived relationships. They then start to work on rebuilding her relationship to herself, others, and meaning. So there we go. She's becoming more fluid. And this is the time when people peak and then plateau and become fluid. So when we're fluid, we're connected to ourself, others, and meaning, and we're connected to our context. We know where we want to go, and we can use the context to support that. Our actions have tractions. We feel connected, blessed, supported, and competent. It is a lovely feeling. There are two problems with being fluid. The one is that we get all puffed up and think we've solved the recipe for life. But actually, it's temporary. The second one is that we try and hold on to the fluidity instead of moving into stuckness again so we can enter another learning cycle. So hubris and trying to hold on to fluidity are the two problems there, because if you are always fluid, that's another version of stuckness. When you're always fluid, you can't bed down the learning, and it interferes with your perception of pain. Conversation for another day, possibly an Enneagram 7 day. So we're back here and we're over here. Maybe this is a good time to check in. How are you doing? Questions? I know I've been coming at you. How are you doing? Are you a bit overwhelmed? Sav, thank you. Anne, hi.
Hi, thank you. I'm so excited to hear you express all of this. There's so much in here that I really want to dig into. What's coming up for me is some of this feels a little bit like it's teetering on therapy. And so I'm just curious about your view on that.
Thank you, Anne. I love your insight there, because it's a tricky thing in this. You're absolutely right. So the problem starts off with the fact that I'm a therapist and a coach. So my inner walls are not terribly clear. That's the first problem. The second problem is there are different kinds of coaching. And so I come from the existential tradition. And so we have more fluid boundaries about the past. And the third response, you can see I've been stewing on this, Anne. The third response is, if we can become subtle and intuitive, trauma-informed coaches, we should be able to raise a repetitive pattern in a person's life without damaging them.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? You can see
it does. Yes, it does. Lots to think about there, and I appreciate the three views that you're bringing to it. Thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful question. Not a lot of people would notice that one.
Julia,
Yeah, Chantel.
I love this question. Thank you, Anne, because I'm not a trained therapist, but as you know, all of my studies into human behavior come from Gestalt psychology and Gestalt therapy, and how this is used in coaching and organizations. And I really pride myself, and I think it's important for us to work with psychologically sophisticated frameworks, because otherwise, it's, what are we doing? If we don't know something about how human beings can change and grow and learn, if we don't know the psychology of that, then sitting around asking coaching questions, it has no foundation. So I'm sort of thumping an old drum of mine here in a chorus for you, because I think we have a responsibility to be psychologically sophisticated in the work that we do. So I think that's important, and I absolutely agree with you. With good observation, with good, in Gestalt we talk about observational data, we can say to somebody in our conversations, I'm noticing this. I noticed it here, I noticed it there, I noticed it there. And can we talk about what that means if this is a pattern that is driving the way that you're functioning? So, and then I've got a question which I'd like to put out. You talk about shame and shame keeping us stuck. Shame is a particular feature, as I understand it, in collectivist cultures, like African traditional cultures. Shame is how the group is held together. And I'm just very interested in that, because working with a lot of African men, shame is such an important part of the way in which they function or not. And I'm not saying it's only there, it happens to all of us, but I'm just very interested in this as a culturally specific thing in African culture, and whether anybody has some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I absolutely love that question, Chantal, because the more I started, I've been researching shame for a while, and absolutely it's the humanizing emotion that stops us murdering each other. So we need it. It has some benefits, but it kind of has gotten overused. So I'd love to hear from other people, but I think that maybe a way of dividing up the two types of shame is, one is kind of related to the wound and to that wounding of not being enough. It's generally, I'm not good enough. Yeah. And that maybe a useful way of working with that is trying to allocate it to the past. Some of the cultural shames are very contemporary, about being a man or being a woman. I don't know. I'm just winging it here, but I would love to explore that more fully. Because for me, I think it's not a well-formed idea, because so while I see it linked to the wound, I know there's got to be a way to transform shame into something useful for recovery without just using it as a weapon, to beat people. Anyone else got comments on shame? Yeah, Miriam. Thanks, Chantal. That's a great question.
Thank you. When it comes to shame, I have 3 clients that are women from Venezuela, and all 3 of them keep going to shame as like anything that goes wrong is shameful for them. Like they live in shame. And one of them I've been working with for about 3 months, and she's an Enneagram 4. And her shame comes from stuff that occurred when she was 4 and 5 years old. And now some of her family members are sick and she's not. So she's ashamed that she's not the way they are. Or she's ashamed that she made it to the US and they didn't. And so we've been working on really self-esteem and rooting her in her who she is. But it's very interesting that all these three women, in every conversation, they go to shame.
Oh, oh. Yeah, and there's been some really interesting podcasts recently about shame, actually from the US, saying, let's bring back shame. Maybe we'll get better behavior. Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think it's a much more complex thing than
Yeah.
I presented in the book, and maybe if Zelda lets me do a second edition, I can build it up. Thanks, Chantal and Miriam. Any other questions?
Julia, if I can come in, it's just a thought. It's like kind of trying to piece this together. There's something about internalized shame which makes the self wrong, that comes from a collective, a culture, a norm on the outside. And so I wonder about the death of shame in the hyper-individualism of the neoliberal self, right? And so if we think about all of our emotions as having some value, and I know there's this whole thing of like shame makes the self wrong, you know, versus guilt, which makes the action wrong, and that there's a shift there, but maybe there's a link between neoliberalism and the death of shame.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Because it has a function in pulling us towards norms without which we, you know, it's like Lord of the Flies, right? So I just offer that as a way of maybe integrating from Chantal to Miriam to your thoughts in some way.
Very nice. Thanks for that, Lucille. That's very nice. I think that's a good way of thinking through the subject. Zelda, I need to make another edition. Any other comments or questions?
Julia, I'm interested by Audrey's comment in the chat. She says, Audrey says, I think self-compassion is much more useful than shame.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm sorry, I haven't, who said that? Maybe where are you on my
That was
screen?
Adrian.
Adrian, hello. Okay,
I
good.
said it, but it was typed by Audrey Rosenthal.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a little tricky around self-compassion, personally and professionally. And I think it's a thing that is a bit like shame, and maybe we'll use the beautiful divisions created by Lucille, that perhaps neoliberalism, or perhaps our current psychological paradigm, is letting us get away with too much. I'm just playing with this. You know, so one of the things that I look at in the book is, you know, this capacity for pain. So absolutely self-compassion, but also not try and get rid of all our inner pain. So I'm a little existential in this kind of idea, and I'm quite stoic. So yes, self-compassion, and also, yes, kind of in that stoic way, get on with it. Helene is having a good laugh. I'm a bit old-fashioned, Helena. Just so, you know, I think there's some real kind of thing in the world that somehow you have to be free of pain. No, we don't. Pain is a sign we're living our lives. I'm being cheeky. Hey, Adrian. No, Audrey, come in and let's hear from you.
I love when we can be cheeky. Yeah, I hear you. And yet if we look at sort of perhaps the lens that I look through when it comes to self-compassion is very much Dr. Kirsten Neff's work. And I think the two of you are not in disagreement. So I think about what is true self-compassion is not letting ourselves get away with everything, or, you know, it's not the same as self-pity. For example, there's like a clear distinction between those two. And she also speaks about fierce self-compassion, which is like also being able to say to ourselves, like, no, you know, so I love this sort of, the categories is like self-judgment versus self-kindness, and then isolation versus common humanity, which also links to what you say about the entitlement, right? That's exactly actually what she speaks to. And then there's mindfulness versus over-identification with emotions. You know, so over-identification with emotions is not seen as self-compassion, for example, but mindfulness is. So that was quite interesting work around that.
Nice. It's one of those tricky areas that, you know, if you look at the trends, kind of we've moved into a massive wave of individualism and self-compassion. So I expect that this world of psychology and coaching is going to start moving a little bit out of it now. Thank you, Audrey, for sharing all your knowledge there. Asanda, hello.
Hi, Julia. Now I'm just thinking about this conversation around the difference between collectivist societies and individualistic societies, and this idea around shame and just what Miriam was sharing about. And maybe also like I'm thinking about like this idea that Steve Biko brings up, like, I mean, or even this idea of like emancipate yourself from mental slavery. I think sometimes, I guess there's a value in both collectivism and individualism, but I think we've lived in a world that values a lot of individualism, and that if you, like, a lot of us are experiencing this shift from being with community and like choosing differently. Like, and if you talk about freedom as like the availability of choices, so, and this the fear of like expanding one's choices and like actually claiming some of that freedom, and how much it moves someone to more like towards like individualism and like thinking about yourself, because you're the first one who went to university, you're the first one who's earning an amount of money, and what that does for someone, or you're the first person to go to the US, and suddenly you away from the tribe, and maybe the shame and guilt that one feels from that, and maybe maybe shame is really linked to like fundamentally how, like, what is our view of the world, and like and what happens when we shift from that, like, and does shame play a role in that, like, if someone comes from the collectivist society and upbringing, suddenly choosing and being in spaces that require one to be individualistic in thinking, so now you have to think, and then there's like all this feeling inside of you that you've like left other people behind, or like you're thinking too differently, and so I think it's very curious link.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and we noticed, like, certainly in politics, in a society that is communally orientated and bound by shame, you're not going to be able to isolate individuals and target them with insults. Just interesting. Okay, any other questions? Thank you for that, Asanda. I've got two things we can do, two directions we can go. Any other comments? Okay. So I've got, Twaita, hi. Hello.
Hi, Julia. How's it? I think probably for me, what I gathered is the usefulness of shame. So probably having suffered some shame that derives from cultural norms, I think it allows us an opportunity to interact with the cultural norms and maybe to prove them different and to help in shifting the norms to a different place, because they are not concrete, right? They are set and they evolve as the time evolves. And as we sit and feel and taste, our shame is not a nice place to be at. But then, depending on the support and the environment one is in, you are able to pivot into actually proving the cultural norms, not necessarily wrong, but saying there's a different perspective. It is this particular thing that you derive shame from. Maybe stuff has moved, and so can the norms move, because one can pivot from there to a complete different opposite and a healthy state. In fact, for me, my shame served as a stepping stone into a different life, completely not challenging or being against my cultural group, but just saying there's another perspective. It doesn't have to be a particular way. That's just me.
I love that. I'm so happy you brought that in, Kukard. I tell you why. I did a lot of stuff around when fluid systems and stuck systems collide. So, you know, when culture remains unchanged, it becomes a kind of a stuck system that relates, that can, you know, I always think of that story like the family who cut the turkey's bottom off. And then it became a family tradition. And then someone said, why do we cut the turkey's bottom off? And then they said, well, great grandpa only had a small baking dish, so we couldn't fit the tail in. So, you know, that was like an example of how norms actually aren't always connected to current realities. And I think that is so interesting what you say, and how if you're a fluid system and now you're engaging with a stuck system, how do you interact with that stuck system? Because you can get totally beaten down. And certainly in organizations, when you have a stuck person in your team, they actually suck the energy out of the team. So there's a very particular dynamic that happens when fluid systems and stuck systems meet. So thank you for talking to that, and also that that we have some kind of a responsibility to work with the stuck systems in our life to change things. Culture is not stagnant. Love that. Thank you, Greta. Brilliant. So now, do you want to A, see more case studies, B, look at how coaches can use the cycle of stuckness in coaching, or both?
I think my preference would be B.
How coaches can use it. Yeah?
There's an overwhelming choice for B in the chat group.
Okay, cool. All righty. So maybe we can kind of just have it in a sort of an open conversation. I've got 2 slides around this. And if there's time, we can look at another case study, and we can look. There's 3 of them. The one is a drug addict. The other one works in the gold mines, and the other one is a case study on race and stuckness. So let me get my slides up, and we can have a look at. Let me just close down all these multiple things here going on, and we can have a look at, right, so using the cycle of stuckness in coaching. So I think I'm trying to keep the framework really, really simple. So I'm going to write some documents that you can find online with a little bit more detail around the 3 relationships with self, others, and meaning. But when you work with this as a coach, I think those should be your areas of exploration. What is that person's relationship to themselves? How big is their identity? What parts of themselves have they left behind? How do they remember themselves 10 years ago to now? What identity experiments can they go through? What was very interesting in the interviews was that the leaders that got stuck, very few had any good engaged relationships. And so that would be really important for coaches to find a way for these leaders to have more engaged relationships so they can get more feedback, so that they can grow and learn and adapt, because they become isolated and rigid and don't trust feedback from anyone. So that is a critical thing. So that would be something else you could work on. And then the meaning thing. I mean, the meaning thing I just absolutely love, because we kind of all just assume that meaning will now be like just downloaded on us as we go through life. But the existential thinkers would argue, no, in fact, we have to make it actively. So it's a bit of hard work. We have to make it. So you get some meaning easily from like children and, you know, growing humans and releasing them back into the wild. But for most of us, we have to make meaning. And through that, we have to kind of get to know who we are and how we're going to actually contribute, and how do we live towards death? And this is a concept from Yalom. How do we live towards death? And particularly important for people in later stages of life. How do we live towards death? What is the meaning of our life at this stage? So, I mean, those would be kind of like some of the questions I would ask. Or how has meaning changed for you as you've stayed in this organization? Where do you get meaning? Once I was cheeky enough to ask someone in FMCG, like, how do you find meaning in selling units? And if people work hard enough, they actually do find meaning. They do find meaning, and it comes from odd places. Like this guy said, actually, what's meaningful for me is being the underdog in a hectic market and giving the finger to the big dogs in the market. That was deeply meaningful for him. So meaning comes in various and tricky ways, but you might have to work quite hard to get there. We've spoken a lot about the feelings. And maybe we should talk a little bit about finding the wound. So this is quite a tricky thing. And very often the kind of wounding will not be clear. But for those of you who know the Enneagram, we can go in through the fixation and find access there. So you know, like that, like the 8s, you know, vulnerability was not easy for them in childhood. Why? Where did you learn to be so tough? Is it helpful now? Those kind of questions. So what part of you has been amputated? So the Enneagrams is a very nice way to kind of get in there if you want to. You don't have to use the term wound. You can use it in completion, an incomplete experience. And even if you never get to the wounding, or if that person never gets to that sort of original sin, if you just keep going on self, others, and meaning, things are going to work out. There is always some sort of healing that happens. The maturity work is also incredibly interesting for thinking around the wounding, because, and I've mapped the kind of existential crises one might experience at each level of maturity. And there is some kind of pattern there. So that you can also use to try and kind of get a grip on the wounding. But, you know, I've never met a person that thinks they're completely fabulous. So there's always going to be, you know, there's always this thing at the core of everyone. There's any questions on this slide before I take you to a very complicated one that's going to drive you all nuts?
Just one thing that comes to mind around coaching this, because I've started to use it more as you've brought it more into our world, Julia. And there's a really simple question or really simple definition that I find lands really well with people, which is to define stuckness. And these are your words, not mine. When the context changes and we stay the same. And that just seems to land in people and open stuff up so quickly. And then you can go, well, where have you seen that? Where can you see that that's happened? And it gets people straight into it because there's like a lived experience through that question or that definition of it. So the context also works as a kind of a door opener in coaching,
That's
I think.
correct. Yeah, I think that's an excellent thing, Simon. And I think that's an excellent suggestion because at the moment we're going around selling all that VUCA work, you know, we'll help you get over VUCA. Well, we're not really, you know, I see Lee, you were having a little, what is she saying? What I meant was, you know how we are thinking about how we can support our clients to go through this volatile, unstable, blah, blah, blah world. But maybe that stuckness model is a way to really help them engage with this. How has the context changed? How have you changed in relation to the context? Oh. Okie dokie. Now I'm going to give you another slide, which is a little bit annoying. How are you in general on the seating? Do you need another breakaway group? Do you want to go off and chat? You okay? No? All right. Okay, so now this is the tricky thing. This is when it gets a bit odd. So coaching stuckness is actually about coaching polarities. So polarities are things where we have a binary answer to something and we think we have to choose one and not both. So stuckness is caused by choosing binaries. Okay, so let's think Enneagram 8. I want to be tough here and vulnerable here. So I don't want to like chop out my vulnerability because it's useful in certain contexts, but I also don't want to chop out my strength because that's useful. I need both. So the answer is, how can I balance out strength and vulnerability? So that's what we have to think about when we coach stuckness. So some of the polarities we have to manage are as follows. This idea of managing a stable inner world. So a stable sense of self. This is who I am. So trying to keep the rhythm inside the person's inner world kind of stable. So they have a sense of who they are. So doing that at the same time as allowing their new person to emerge. So Sartre said that the definition of human is our capacity to emerge and grow. And when we stop doing this, we are an object. And that's the definition of objectification. So we need to do both these things. So this is a polarity. It's a tricky one. How do I retain an essential sense of self and an inner stability, and at the same time open myself up to the forces of the context? Does that make sense? How are you doing? Kate, you want to chip in here? I know we've had this conversation today. No? Yes? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very intriguing idea, Julia. I mean, I'm intrigued by all of this, and my brain is furiously mapping clients and friends and where people are, and yeah. So the whole model, I mean, which I have seen briefly before, but you're introducing it in a whole other way today. It's so exciting. But this particular theme of the stable inner world and the emergent inner world. Yeah, we chatted about it earlier, and my take on it to Julia was, well, if we have the inner stability, then surely we can bend. So I'm still sitting with that idea. So inner stability relating to, I see it more as equanimity and feeling centered, but being able to bend with things. So I haven't landed where you've got to with it, Julia. That they're polarities.
Yeah. And so my polarity is similar to yours, except that so if we I suppose mine is not so informed by mindfulness. Mine is like having a very tight definition of who I am, and being, so if I'm a writer and I'm a mother, then that's all I've got in my identity. And that's a stable identity, instead of, well, I could also be like a Olympic swimmer. But I think it's something to kind of figure out, and it relates to the next point. Thank you, Kate, about being ourselves or transcending ourselves. It's a similar sort of an idea. Like, let me be myself. Let me be that Enneagram 8. But maybe also I can be better on some aspects. I can transcend myself. Or, you know, lots of people write on spiritual growth, and there's some writers that talk about soul growth, which is growing into our humanity. So grow down into our humanity, into our immanence, and grow up into our transcendent quality, but you need both. Spirituality isn't just reducing the range, it's spreading the range out. Now I'm getting esoteric. Being for ourselves, being for others, creating meaning, knowing life is absolutely absurd anyway, but I'm going to create meaning for today. Allocating shame to the past, taking responsibility for the future, and my absolute favorite, which is seeing the world as I'm in it versus seeing the world as it is. So I mainly see the world as I'm in it. I look at the world through my eyes and through my experiences in life. And that places me at the center of the universe because I'm the seer. Wouldn't it be interesting to sometimes be able to see the world not through my eyes, but rather as it is? Okay. So we had a few ideas there around working with the 3 losses and the 3 gains, working with the emotions, working with the context, working with the polarities. Any more comments from people? Do you want to go off into a breakaway group? No. Okay. Do you want me to keep talking? Okay, good. So you're happy where we've left it for coaching the cycle of stuckness? Maybe I can entertain you with some case studies.
Julia, hi.
Yes. Anna, hello.
Hello. Can you say a little bit more about the maturity work and how it relates with working with the wound, and how we coaches can approach that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that lovely question. So, as you know, I've sort of come from the existential tradition, and there's a couple of existential things that happen in our life. Yalom calls them the existential givens, and they are related to death, meaningless, isolation. Have I said them all, Simon? Death, meaningless, isolation,
Anxiety.
anxiety. Thank you. So I've mapped those kinds of dilemmas onto the maturity model. So, for example, those people that know the maturity model will know that at the first stage, conforming, the big existential dilemma there is actually isolation. If I stop complying with the group, will I be left out in the fields to be eaten by a lion? And then it goes onwards from there. It's not always clear at post-conventional levels where it seems to all get mixed up. But, you know, for each of them, death, the kind of question is, how do I live beyond death? What is the meaning of my life? How do I make sure that I live well as I'm dying? Because, you know, we're all dying. We might express it as a form of living, but actually we're dying. We're going towards death, all of us. So how do I work with that? Anxiety.
It's actually freedom.
Freedom.
So
I don't know why I forgot that.
There's you and I with existential psychotherapy backgrounds, and neither of us could get that.
I know, that's embarrassing because this
Freedom.
whole thing on freedom. Yeah.
But the link between freedom and anxiety, and my brain got scrambled. It's freedom.
Well, that's it. Thank you, Simon, and my apologies there, because the freedom thing is central to existential psychotherapy. And in fact, the real subject of what I'm talking about, that we need to take our freedom, but with that freedom comes anxiety, choice, and not knowing. And so that's a sort of a later stage maturity issue. You know, how do I take my freedom and be myself, knowing that I might not fit in or people might not like what I'm doing? And what do I do with the anxiety? Because at early stages of maturity, our tolerance of anxiety or difference is so limited that it feels overwhelming and is a cause of stuckness. So what do I do with my anxiety there? Lee, do you want to?
Julia, thank you. This is really interesting. And as a few people have said, we need time to process. However, I got a bit stuck on the comment you made about your client who found meaning by putting up his middle finger at senior management. Because, hello, if that's not a paradox, then I don't know. So would you kind of just elaborate a bit on that one? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were speaking to Anna's point as well. So I just want to bed that down, and I'm coming back. So death, freedom, isolation, meaninglessness. So those are the existential issues that you can broach that might be causing the stuckness. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. So Lee, yes, and it wasn't at his senior management, it was the competitors in the market.
Oh.
So he was going like, look what you can do with your resources, but look what I can do with mine. And I think it was more of a kind of a healing from being bullied than anything else. Quite interesting. You know, who am I to judge that? So I mean, it's maybe an earlier stage kind of form of meaning. Who knows? I don't know. But it seemed to get him out of bed. It's like often yeah, I told you.
It's the healthy rebel, I would say, coming up. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that in. Okay, Any more questions, case studies, comments? Yeah, Rickers, hello.
Question, Julia. If you consider Julia of 10 years ago, and then Julia got, I don't want to say dug into stuckness. What is the single biggest surprise, single biggest insight?
Yeah. I'm so happy to answer that question. Thank you, Rickers. So I did this research because I was stuck in my life. And so I went out and I interviewed all these people and I did all this data analysis. And I decided that my sample group were lazy, stupid, entitled, and full of shit. So I took it to my supervisor and he looked at me and he said, Julia, why are you so mean to all those poor people? So fast forward, a lot of psychotherapy. Fast forward, a lot of a very important film that I watched around shame. And what I began to realize is the same lenses I was judging myself with, I was now applying to my sample group. So in order to do decent research, I had to change my attitude towards myself. And really, I haven't been that successful at it, but I'm going down the road. So I had to change the way I read my own stuckness in order to find the value in the stuckness in other people's lives. It was quite a phenomenal shift. And I've written 2 papers on the reflexivity process because it's now 10 years. And I've had 4 massive shifts like that in the research. So that was the first thing, was like, I cannot use, basically my own inner world is harsh and unreliable and not useful. The second kind of big shift in these 2 reflexivity papers I'm happy to share is a change around, it was around race and my own thinking around the sample group. And how I let myself get away with a sample group that was not representative because I was lazy and I made lots of justifications and I didn't interview Black people who were struggling with stuckness. And so then I had to take myself off and apply, what's her name, white fragility type stuff to myself in the background quietly until I became strong enough to say it in public, and I had to take myself in hand and decide what I was going to do. So one of the reasons I wrote the book was because I wanted to remedy that error. And I wanted to show how stuckness operated in particular in Black people's inner worlds through research, something I'd missed out in my own white narrow-mindedness in a UK university. So that was the third one. Then my father died. 5 friends died. I started talking to Helena and I realized I hadn't actually thought through the death, the wounding, the loss that is inherent in the cycle. I needed to have that loss for it to become salient to me. And so when that happened, the theory changed again. So it's been a radical tour, Rickers. I've learned a lot, and it's not over yet because I'm just about to go through another whole set of experiences that are going to change my thinking. I'd love to share those papers. You can see what you think. The one's coming out in the Hermeneutics Circular this month, which is an existential psychotherapist's kind of magazine. And the other one, I'm waiting for confirmation, but I'll send it out anyway if you want to see it. It's just like how much research changes when your inner world changes. Thank you for that.
Thanks. Yeah, that does sound profound.
Well, yeah, thank you. So we've got 10 minutes, one more case study or one more question. Or check out. Case study. Okay, quieter. Let me get us in there. Okay. So let's have a look. I can, at the case study. Here, slideshow. We've done Adelia. Should we do Pete? You know what I like about Pete? Actually, no, let's not do Pete. Let's rather do the gold mine guy, Jacob. What I like about Jacob in this case study is there's not a coach in the story. So, that's another part of this book is that things come into people's lives and smooth things out and create pathways. It doesn't always rely on a coach. So Jacob is a corporate executive. He grew up in a street gang where he learned how to be tough, and he used his toughness to work his way into senior management on a gold mine. Now, I've met a lot of these oaks. So the company where Jacob worked decided they wanted to change the command and control leadership culture to something visionary and human-centric. Jacob said Jacob was told to change his leadership style because he was not future fit. Anyone heard of the curse of not being future fit? So they hired a coach to help him change his leadership style, but he refused to go because he believed that gold mines couldn't be run by sissies. Really, what are you thinking? He continued with his existing leadership style, and somebody interpreted his style as racist, and he had to resign. So you can see how he's churning to a halt, and then we have a nice cutoff point where his style is experienced as racist. So he has to go. So now there's Jacob. Jacob leaves the mining company angry. The anger persists for years and threatens to ruin his marriage. He can't get another job because everyone in the industry is aware of his reputation. So he takes to fishing all day. And fishing allows him to process his pain and anger, and he begins to grieve. The grief softens him, and he can reconnect to himself more, his wife, and look for meaning in his life. So fishing rather than coaching is what transforms Jacob. Jacob is invited to fill in as a rugby coach at a local school. He does it very well, and they offer him a job, and he finds the work meaningful. He's softened a bit, but he's still quite tough, and soon the parents are complaining. Jacob takes this feedback and resolves to work on his style and its origins, even though he's deeply worried he'll lose his job as he did last time. So there we go. Maybe Jacob is going to go into a transformation process. Just checking time. Does that make sense? Here's Tommy. Tommy grew up poor and black, surrounded by unemployed family. She completed high school and got a degree in journalism. She was hired by a white-owned local newspaper to attract young black readers. Tommy reported on everything of interest to young black readers. This included their lived experience of racism and the hardships they faced by being black in an anti-black world. The white editor told her to tone it down a bit. She was not Malcolm X's girlfriend. Tommy was furious, not just at his request to tone down black narratives, but also at the sexism implicit in the comment about Malcolm X. Her writing became more focused on racism, and the editor rejected more of her copy. So you can see it's the same thing. The wounding is different, the behaviors from a previous time, but it's not getting her anywhere. So now the developmental impasse. Tommy was incensed and the situation felt hopeless. Others in the newspaper watched, but did not help her. She became isolated and she decided she'd leave as soon as she could find other work. But she really needed the work. She couldn't find a job anywhere else, is the next point. This is the point at which she's releasing. So she had to deal with the situation at hand. She felt her choices were A, continue the fight as she was doing, B, broaden the reporting of Black experience away from a racism focus, be cunning and slip stories around racism in under the cover of other stories, or D, leave without a job to go to. She sensed that to be an effective advocate for Black lives in this publication, she had to process her anger and grieve that once again, she was at the mercy of the white world. She had to figure out how she could choose her freedom as well as support others' freedom in this context. She decided to stay and chose B and C. So she was going to broaden the experience of reporting of Black experience and slip stories in. She decides to play the system, to work in the system. Tommy stays in the organization, becomes a senior editor. She can bring in more staff from diverse backgrounds, and she can affect editorial policy. She grows the young Black readership base for the publication. Not all the advertisers are happy with this. Many leave, and Tommy is left with a new problem to solve. There goes the cycle all over again. Okay. It's been long. Anybody want to say one thing about the case studies? The slides are available. I'm available for chatting. Did I burn you out? Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your attention and you being here. I'm up for any chats.
There's a lot of comments just thanking you for the session and the insights. And I think if we can all just come off our microphones and probably just say thank you and goodbye. But Julia, this was awesome. And a lot of people, and I mean, feeling quite expanded and stretched and thinking and pondering. So there's going to be lots more coming from this. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you. Looking forward to the book.
Well, yeah, good. Thank you.
Can't wait to read the book.
Great, Miriam. Thank you.